If you've ever wondered what labs to look at if you're a type 2 diabetic or perhaps you have PCOS or pre-diabetic, then this episode is for you. Welcome to the Diabetes Maven, the podcast for women who are done feeling stuck and ready to take control of type 2 diabetes. I'm your host, Stephanie, a nurse practitioner and type 2 diabetic, and a woman on a mission to help you ditch diabetes for good. If you've ever felt frustrated by confusing advice, tired of the blood sugar roller coasters, and wondered if true healing is even possible, you're in the right place. Each week, we'll talk about what really moves the needle, from balancing your blood sugar, your metabolism, building healthy mindsets, and eating smarter, moving with purpose, and strengthening your faith along the way. Because managing diabetes isn't just about numbers. It's about freedom, energy, and living the life God designed for you, without complications. Subscribe to the Diabetes Maven wherever you listen to podcasts, and let's take this journey together. Hey, and welcome back. I'm Stephanie, your host, and I'm so excited to talk about labs today. I did a thing and went all in and got a comprehensive lab panel done through Function Health. Now, I am not getting paid from Function Health, and honestly, there are other companies that do this, but I did it specifically through Function Health. I follow Dr. Hyman, he's great. But they check for 80 plus biomarkers. And I've been sitting with these results for a couple of weeks, trying to figure out how am I going to bring it to you guys and really educate you on what to be looking for. This data is a lot, and I'm a data's girl, I'm a science girl. I really like to look at what's going on the inside so that I can really start thinking about what changes to make and implement. So here's the plan. This is probably going to be a 3 or 4 part series, and today we're going to focus on metabolic health, A1C, fasting blood sugar, fasting insulin, and cortisol. These 4 together give you a picture that no single test on its own ever could, and honestly, half of those things are not even checked by your regular doctor. If you're lucky, your doctor probably definitely should check A1C every 3 months. That is, if you actually go to the doctor and you're fasting blood sugar, but they don't really check insulin and cortisol on a regular basis, and unless something's going on, okay? Now, if you go to endocrinology or maybe a GYN, you might have those lab tests done if something's actually going on. But that's kind of the problem, right? By the time something actually shows up as a red flag, your body has often been compensating for years. I was just talking to my husband and I was asking, we're both in the medical field. He's a physician, I'm a nurse practitioner. And I was just wondering, why on earth are we not checking insulin first, right? It seems like when you are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and your A1C is finally over 6.5, insulin will show up about 10 to 15 years before your body actually starts to show that you have diabetes. So it just makes sense to me as a professional to really start looking at this lab sooner, because I feel like if we look at the insulin resistance, or we find out that we have insulin resistance sooner, then we can probably prevent prediabetes and diabetes, right? And that's what today is all about. So let's get into it. First, we're going to start with A1C. You guys are probably familiar with that term. Maybe you don't quite understand what it is. It's called hemoglobin A1C. And if you look on your labs, it says HB capital A 1 lowercase c. If you had any blood work, decent chance that you've seen this number. But let me break down what it actually is, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood markers, even though you know A1C needs to be below 7 or it's 5, or you know the number that you need to get to, but do you know what exactly is A1C? Basically, we have red blood cells all throughout, and they have a protein called hemoglobin. When glucose is floating around your bloodstream, it sticks to the hemoglobin protein, and it stays stuck for an entire lifespan of a red blood cell, which is roughly about 3 months. That's why we check our A1C every 3 months, because the red blood cells start to die off and then you generate new ones. So it's not a snapshot, it's more like a 3-month look back at your blood. So you couldn't manipulate this and, starve yourself for 2 days and expect it to be normal, because it's really going back 3 months. And here's the standard range breakdown. Below 5.7 is considered normal. If you have the 5.7 to 6.4 A1C, that's considered prediabetes, and anything over 6.5 is diabetes. And this is the part that gets interesting. In metabolic health world, optimal doesn't just mean non-diabetic. You can still be non-diabetic and still have your metabolic health out of whack. Optimal really is below 5.5. And honestly, a lot of functional medicine practitioners are now targeting below 5.2. And this is all based on emerging research that shows diabetes risk exists on a continuum, even in the so called normal range. Okay, so I want you to really think about that. Someone with the 5.4 A1C and someone with a 5.0 A1C both show up as normal on a standard lab report, but the data says the risk is meaningfully different between these two people. Now, one thing I want to flag is that A1C has limitations. It can be skewed by things like anemia, certain hemoglobin variants, blood transfusions, and even pregnancy. And here's a weird one that comes up in a lot of fitness community. If you are a high volume endurance athlete, your A1C can actually read slightly elevated, even if your metabolic health is excellent. So your A1C alone is never the full story. And that's why it needs to be paired with the next marker, fasting blood sugar. Now, this is your blood sugar reading that after you've gone for at least 8 hours, usually you fast and you go take your blood sugar in the morning and they check your labs, and then this will tell how your fasting blood sugar is. It tells you your baseline glucose when there's no food influencing the picture. Okay. Stated ranges under 100 is normal, 100 to 125 is pre diabetic, and 126 and above is considered diabetic. But again, the functional health community, not function health where I got my labs, but the whole community as a whole pushes the target down. The optimal range that most metabolic health researchers now point to is somewhere between 72 and 85. And if you have diabetes and thinking sounds impossible, just keep listening. I promise it's going to be valuable. There's a reason for that tight control. People with the fasting blood sugar consistently sitting in the 90s, still technically normal, may already have some degree of insulin resistance. Their blood sugar isn't high enough to flag anything, but their pancreas is still working overtime to keep it in range, right? The system is compensating. And that's what this whole 10 to 15-year period is before diabetes actually shows up. And it brings up my next question. Why would your fasting blood sugar be creeping up even before eating anything? Now, there are a few reasons this can happen: stress, poor sleep, chronic cortisol elevation, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, and something called the dawn phenomenon. Your body naturally releases a little cortisol and glucagon in the morning hours to help you wake up and get ready for your day, which nudges your blood sugar to increase. For most people, it's totally normal, but if you have stress hormones that are chronically elevated, that morning rise can be more dramatic than it really should be. And there's one more thing that I want to flag here. Fasting glucose is a single moment. Again, your blood sugar might start off at 90, but all day long it's running 120. How high it spikes after you eat and comes back down also matters. And that's where the CGM comes in, the continuous glucose monitor. It becomes so valuable because you can actually start seeing trends all day long. I personally use Stilo, so check it out if you want more of a better picture, okay? They're honestly a game changer because they show you patterns that one time morning fast blood sugar draw is not going to capture, okay? But even without the CGM, if you don't have one, the fasting glucose is valuable data, especially when you read it alongside A1C and then the next thing that we're going to talk about. Now, when you talk about insulin, okay, I'm very passionate about this lab value because I just feel like there's not a lot of people testing for this. And again, as a nurse practitioner, as a provider, I went to nursing school, I got my master's, and I just don't remember talking about insulin levels. And it kind of makes me angry in a sense because I'm thinking our whole healthcare system is built on disease treatment instead of disease prevention. And we need to change that. But that's why you're here, because you want to learn all that you can. Now, most people never get tested for insulin, and I'd argue it is probably the most important out of all four of these. Your fasting insulin measures how much insulin your pancreas is producing after an overnight fast. Now, remember, insulin is that hormone that tells your body, hey, here's where the glucose needs to go, and it opens that cell door and lets glucose actually get in so it can work and it's not sitting in your bloodstream. Sometimes it can stay elevated for 10 to 15 years, as I stated before your other labs look abnormal. Okay. Your cells gradually stop responding to insulin for some reason as they used to, right? It could be Some people actually, some of the research that I've read says that, think of a lock and a key. A little lock area gets kind of gunky with fatty buildup because there is a lot of white fat production and storage when you are insulin resistant. And the insulin just can't really communicate with that receptor. And then insulin stays in your bloodstream and glucose stays in your bloodstream. So there could be a myriad of reasons why the insulin is not working. There's a whole cascade of inflammation that happens when your metabolic health is dysregulated because our whole cell system communicates with each other. And when something is inflamed or something is just out of whack, then it just sets off a whole cascade of other things not working properly. And insulin is just affected that way. Over time, in that 10 to 15-year period, your pancreas actually compensates by producing more and more insulin. So you might have a normal number, but your pancreas is overproducing because our body is very resilient that way. It likes equilibrium. So it likes to try to balance everything out. So while your blood glucose might look completely fine, you have a normal A1C, a normal fasting blood sugar, your insulin is quietly elevated, working twice as hard in the background to keep everything in check. That's why fasting insulin is such a powerful early warning signal. So if you are listening right now and you are pre-diabetic, or perhaps you have no signs of diabetes and you're just listening to this, you found me and you're just interested in metabolic health, even if you do have diabetes, I would highly encourage you to ask your doctor for this lab. You don't have to go to Function Health. Function Health can be very pricey. It's probably upwards of $400 for all these labs that you get two sets of them and they charge you once a year. And they also give you, you can meet with a provider. I've never met with a provider, but they also give you supplements to take and foods to avoid based on your labs, food to enjoy based on your labs. But if you don't do these 80 plus biomarkers that we're going to go over the next several episodes, then at least ask your doctor for an insulin level. I asked my doctor for the first time a couple of years ago, and he was fine doing it, but yeah, at first he was just letting me know that insurance may not pay for it. And that kind of made me sad again as a person who really loves health promotion. I'm just like, why wouldn't insurance want to pay for this? Because wouldn't insurance want us to be healthier? That's another episode. At any rate, you can talk to your doctor and ask them for this specific lab. And if they don't, find another doctor that's going to work with you, or you can just go directly to Quest or LabCorp. And a lot of these times you can order specific labs individually straight with them. And so when you get your lab result, the metabolic health experts target fasting insulin below 10. Okay. And a lot of practitioners who are really on top of this are looking for under 6. Ideally, somewhere between 2 and 6 would be the best thing. Now, if your fasting insulin is on the higher end, even within normal lab range, it's worth paying attention to it. It means that your pancreas is working hard. It also means that you have an opportunity to intervene early, right? Before anything progresses. Things that drive fasting insulin up will be high carb intake, right? Especially refined carbs, the ultra processed snacks, the things that are made in the lab, not real food, sugar, frequent eating or sleep, sedentary behavior. All right. Now, the things that will decrease insulin, strength training, our muscles are superb at using insulin, reducing those processed foods and eating whole foods. Intermittent fasting is something that really helps drive the insulin level down. If you're not eating, you're not producing insulin, it starts to decrease. Better sleep, stress management, all of these sound familiar, I'm sure. It's all the things that they say do, but we never understood why. These are all the things that we all talk about over the years. Exercise more, stop eating junk food, all of these things. But having that number from your blood work makes it real in a different way. There's one more concept to mention here. It's called the HOMA IR. Some labs will calculate this for you, but others won't. It stands for Homeostatic Model Assessment of Insulin Resistance. And it's basically a formula that uses both your fasting glucose and your fasting insulin together to estimate how insulin resistant you are. If your lab doesn't calculate it, you can do it yourself, a little math. I know I don't want to hurt your brain, but it's a really easy formula. You just multiply your fasting glucose, and if you have these numbers, you can do this right now. And you multiply your fasting insulin, and then divide that number by 22.5. A result that's under 1 is generally considered optimal. Under 2 is acceptable, but above 2.5, it suggests that you have meaningful insulin resistance. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is cortisol. Cortisol, maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, um, is a stress hormone. It is the primary stress hormone. When you are in fight or flight mode, you want to be able to get away from that stressor. So your body increases cortisol and then it tells your liver to dump out a lot of glucose so that your body can work. Remember, glucose we need. Our body in every function needs glucose. Um, this process is called gluconeogenesis. And at the same time, it also makes your muscle and fat cells less responsive to insulin. In other words, it raises your blood sugar and induces a temporary insulin resistance at the same time. And that short-term stress response, you're running from something, right? You are late, or you have a bear chasing you, or you're in danger. You need that burst of energy. And of course, when you think about it, it's a brilliant biology. It's obviously very useful. Now, we run into problems when the stress becomes chronic, when cortisol is elevated day after day, and you're essentially triggering that same blood sugar spike and cycle. And research has actually shown that elevated morning cortisol is independently associated with higher fasting plasma glucose. It's not just a feeling, it's actually measurable data. So when your cortisol is higher in the morning, it correlates to a higher blood sugar. It should be the highest in the morning, and that's actually helps you, right? We talked about our cortisol spike when we're sleeping and it gets close to the morning time because it's actually helping us get ready for the day, and it reaches its lowest point at night. When that rhythm gets disrupted, though, by poor sleep or too much late night screen time, or maybe you work night shift like I used to, maybe chronic psychological stress, those metabolic consequences are real. Okay. Here's the connection that I think is really underappreciated. If your fasting glucose looks a little high and your A1C is creeping up, but your diet is pretty clean, then cortisol might be a part of the story. Stress is a blood sugar issue. It's not a metaphor, it's basic physiology. So, testing that cortisol ideally means looking at multiple points throughout the day, morning, midday, evening, to get a sense of rhythm, not just the level. Now, at Function Health, they will guide you as to when to take your blood because it matters, especially if you're a woman, on what part of your cycle you're going to be getting blood. And then they want you to do it fasting, of course. So you're automatically going to go in the morning. And then after, so many days, you shouldn't have any medicine leading up to your labs, but they'll guide you through that. There are other online places that will test urine, and I originally did that, and it's very specific instructions a lot. You're testing your urine at different times of the day and specific parts of your cycle so that they can get the best picture of what your cortisol might be. So you can just again Google cortisol testing. You can do it at home. They can mail you a package and you can do a urine test, or you can just ask again your provider to get a cortisol level. All right. Let's come on back and let's just kind of summarize here. You got your A1C, that's a 90-day sugar average, fasting glucose, which is your baseline morning blood sugar before you've eaten anything and while you've been sleeping. Remember, optimal range is 72 to 85. And then you have your fasting insulin. This is often the first thing to shift when metabolic health starts to slide, and most people never test it. And then finally, we talked about cortisol. This is a stress hormone that's hiding in plain sight that can elevate your blood sugar, drive insulin resistance, and completely scramble up your metabolic markers, even if your diet is all a-okay. Now, one single of these tells the full story, but together they give you a better picture of what's happening inside of your body at the metabolic level, not after something has already gone wrong, which is what we're trying to avoid. So, the reason I want to start here with these four is because I know these are markers that can change with lifestyle. They are not just fixed, right? You're not going to have your A1C forever. When you're diagnosed, it might be 8, and then you can make it go down with diet, sleep, stress management, and movement. All of this shows up in those numbers, which means you have more control over them than you might think. And Now, I got all this from my Function Health panel, and I really can't say enough about how different it felt to have 80 plus markers. And I can't wait to really go into the rest of them because I got my A1C back and it was 5.4, which I was definitely celebrating. And my fasting blood sugar was only 77. So, definitely the things that I have done over the last year, the last 2 years, I see it in the numbers. I am working extremely hard on a daily basis. You don't need drastic changes. You need small, repeatable changes that are easy to do. And that's what I hope that I'm showing you on when I do this podcast and YouTube, up on social media, really showing you that you don't have to change much, but you do have the control, and it starts with knowing your numbers. And so, my call to action for you today is to either look up Function Health or some similar. And if you're able to afford it, go for it. You will not be sorry getting all of this information. If you don't want all of these labs, no problem. You can start with your physician and just ask them, hey, I want to know these four things. Of course, they're already checking your A1C, they're already checking your blood sugar, but you just need to ask for a fasting insulin and cortisol level. If you can't do anything else, start there and just see. Hmm, I'm struggling to get my A1C down. Maybe it is cortisol. And if your cortisol comes back higher than it's supposed to, then okay, I really need to work on my stressors and sleep. That's where the cortisol level is going to come in. So I really want you to get those numbers and start there. Make sure that you're following me on YouTube and subscribe to my channel. Find the podcast wherever you like to listen and stay tuned for the next set of labs. I'm going to be going over heart markers and kidney markers and all of those things. So I'll catch you next time. In the meantime, you've got this. Thanks for listening to Ditching Diabetes with the Diabetes Maven. Share this episode with a friend and leave a review so more women can ditch diabetes for good. Grab all of your free guides and resources at thediabetesmaven.com, and I'll see you in the next episode. Stay well.